My name is Chloe Thompson, and for the last year of my mother's life, my week was cleaved into two distinct parts. There were the 5 days I spent as a nurse, a blur of sterile corridors, compassionate urgency, and the quiet hum of life support machines. And then there were the weekends, which belonged entirely to my mother, Amelia. Every Friday evening, I would drive the 60 miles from my small city apartment to the sprawling, familiar comfort of my childhood home. Those 48 hours were a sacred ritual of quiet care, preparing her favorite meals, reading to her from the worn paperbacks that lined every wall, and simply sitting with her, holding her frail hand as the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows. My younger sister, Lisa Thompson, was the one who lived there, the one who bore the daily, grinding burden of our mother's illness. At least, that was the story she told. To the outside world, to our extended family, Lisa was a saint, the perfect, self-sacrificing caregiver who had put her own life on hold. And I, in my weary gratitude, believed it. I saw her constant presence as a gift, a sacrifice I, with my demanding career, could not make. I ignored the subtle, poisoned barbs she'd slip into her conversation. "Mom had a tough day Wednesday," she'd sigh, just as I'd arrive. "She was asking for you. It's hard for her to understand that your job is so demanding." I'd feel a familiar pang of guilt, a feeling Lisa cultivated with the skill of a master gardener. In reality, while I was tending to strangers, Lisa was tending to our mother's fears, spinning a narrative of my absence and alleged greed. She was a constant, whispering presence in our mother's ear, a toxic drip of lies that slowly eroded the bedrock of trust we had shared for a lifetime. My mother, a shy, gentle woman who had spent 30 years as a town librarian, was weakened by her illness. Her world shrunk to the confines of that house, her reality shaped by the daughter who never left her side. I saw the change in her, a new, pained confusion in her eyes when she looked at me, but I attributed it to her medication, to the fog of her condition. I never imagined it was the work of my own sister. The day of the will reading, held in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of our family lawyer, Mr. Davies, was the day my world broke apart. I sat beside Lisa, who was performing a pitch-perfect display of quiet grief. I expected the will to be simple, a 50-50 split of the estate, as our parents had always promised. The centerpiece was the family home, a beautiful old Victorian worth over $1 million, a house filled with the ghosts of our happy childhood. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and began to read. The legal jargon was a meaningless drone until he arrived at the final operative clause. "To my younger daughter, Lisa Thompson," he read, his voice faltering slightly. "In recognition of her unwavering devotion and care, I bequeath my entire estate, including the property at 212 Chestnut Lane." The words sucked the air from my lungs. I turned to stare at Lisa, who was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, the very picture of sorrowful surprise. But it was the next line, the codicil, that was the true, brutal blow. "My elder daughter, Chloe Thompson," the will continued, "is to receive nothing from this estate, as her choices in life have been a profound disappointment to me, and she has shown little regard for her family in my time of greatest need." The lie was so audacious, so exquisitely cruel, it was a work of art. My weekend visits, my late-night calls, the career I had chosen, a life of caring for others, all of it twisted into a narrative of neglect and disappointment. I looked at Lisa, and in that fleeting moment her mask of grief slipped. I saw a flicker of smug, triumphant victory in her eyes, and I knew this was not my mother's will. This was Lisa's masterpiece. While I was clearing out the few boxes of my childhood belongings from the attic, a task Lisa had magnanimously granted me a single weekend to complete, I stumbled upon a heavy cedar chest I had never seen before. It was tucked away under the eaves, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. It wasn't my mother's style. It was ornate with a heavy brass lock. My curiosity piqued. I jimmied the lock open with the edge of a ruler. The chest was filled not with the expected family heirlooms, but with dozens of leather-bound journals. I opened the first one. The handwriting was my mother S., but the words were a revelation. My mother, the shy, quiet librarian, had been living a secret life. She was a writer, a prolific romance novelist, writing under the pseudonym Amelia Rose. Tucked into the flyleaf of a journal from 5 years prior was a folded, official-looking document. I carefully unfolded it. It was a notarized deed of gift. "To my daughter, Chloe," it read, in my mother's elegant script. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my literary works, including all copyrights, royalties, and any and all unpublished manuscripts, written under my own name or any pseudonym. I give this to you, my dear Chloe, as you are the only one who has ever truly understood my heart. My hands trembled as I read the words. It was a message from the mother I knew, the woman Lisa had tried to erase. It was a lifeline thrown across time and deceit. At the very bottom of the chest, wrapped in velvet, was a thick, typewritten manuscript. The title on the page was The Crimson Compass. I sat there, in the dusty, forgotten corner of the attic, and I began to read. Lisa thought she had inherited everything. She was about to discover she had only inherited the house, while I had been given the keys to our mother's soul. The 2 days I spent in that house, packing away the remnants of my youth, were a form of psychological torture. Lisa swam about the rooms with an air of unearned ownership, a phone perpetually pressed to her ear as she discussed renovation plans. "Oh, absolutely, the kitchen needs to be completely gutted," I heard her say, her voice bright and brittle. "And Mother's old rose garden, it's so much upkeep. I'm thinking a nice, modern stone patio." She was talking about erasing our mother, scrubbing her from the very walls of the home she had so lovingly curated. Each of her pronouncements was a small, sharp stab to my heart. She treated me with a cloying pity, the magnanimous victor offering crumbs to the vanquished. "Are you sure you don't want to take this old armchair, Chloe?" she'd ask, gesturing to the seat our mother had spent thousands of hours in, reading. "It probably won't fit in your little apartment, but I'd hate to just throw it out." I moved in a silent, grief-stricken haze, my only solace the heavy weight of the manuscript and journals now safely stowed in my car. It was a secret I hugged close, a shield against Lisa's casual cruelty. The world and my sister saw me as the disinherited, disappointed daughter. They had no idea I was sitting on a buried treasure. When I finally drove away from that house for the last time, I didn't look back. The rearview mirror showed the grand Victorian facade shrinking into the distance, but I was not leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with my mother's true legacy. Back in my small apartment, surrounded by boxes of my past, I immersed myself in Amelia Rose's world. I read all of her journals, devoured her words. A portrait emerged of a woman I had only known in part. The shy librarian was a mask she wore for the world. In her journals, she was a passionate, witty, and fiercely intelligent observer of the human heart. She wrote about her fears, her dreams, and her profound love for her daughters. In an entry from just before her diagnosis, she wrote about me. "Chloe has a caregiver's soul," it read. "She gives so much of herself to others. I worry she doesn't save enough for herself. She sees the world with such clarity and compassion. She has my heart, if not my voice." Then I read The Crimson Compass. It was a masterpiece, a sweeping historical romance set in the 18th century Caribbean, full of adventure, intrigue, and a love story so powerful it left me breathless. My mother's prose was elegant and evocative, her characters so vividly drawn they felt real. It was not just a good book, it was a brilliant one, a book that deserved to be read. The notarized document was my map. The manuscript was the treasure. My first call was not to a publisher, but to a lawyer. I needed to know where I stood. I found a sharp, experienced intellectual property attorney named Marcus Thorne. I sat in his office, my mother's document laid out on his polished desk. "This is a legally binding deed of gift," he confirmed, his eyes gleaming with professional interest. "It was notarized and executed while your mother was of sound mind, years before the will was changed. It operates outside the will, as the literary estate was gifted to you during her lifetime. It was no longer hers to bequeath in the will, it's ironclad. So Lisa can't touch it?" I asked, a surge of hope rising in my chest. "She can try," Marcus said with a wry smile, "but she will fail. This is your property, Ms. Thompson. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" I looked down at the manuscript in my lap. "I want to share my mother's voice with the world," I said. "I want to build the legacy my sister tried to destroy." My next step was to find a literary agent. It was a daunting process. I was a nurse, not a publishing insider. I sent out a dozen query letters, each one carefully crafted, explaining the extraordinary circumstances of the submission. I received a string of polite, impersonal rejections. They saw posthumous submission and debut author and likely tossed it in the slush pile. But I was my mother's daughter. I had her quiet, persistent strength. I researched the top agents in the historical fiction genre and found her. Evelyn Reed, a legend in the business, known for her impeccable taste and fierce advocacy for her clients. I sent her a query, but this time I included the first 3 chapters of The Crimson Compass. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. "This is Evelyn Reed," a crisp, authoritative voice said. "I'm calling about the Amelia Rose submission. Ms. Thompson, I have one question for you. How soon can you get the rest of this manuscript to my office?" The partnership with Evelyn Reed was a whirlwind. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of energy and strategic brilliance who saw the immense potential in my mother's work. "This is not just a book, Chloe," she told me during our first meeting in her chic Manhattan office. "This is a story. The shy librarian with a secret life as a romance novelist, the daughter reclaiming her mother's hidden legacy. The press is going to devour this." Evelyn orchestrated the entire campaign with military precision. She commissioned a beautiful, evocative cover for The Crimson Compass and began a whisper campaign, sending advance copies to influential book reviewers and tastemakers. The buzz began to build almost immediately. "A stunning, lost masterpiece," one influential blogger wrote. "Amelia Rose writes with the emotional depth of a Bronte and the thrilling pace of a modern bestseller." While Evelyn conquered the publishing world, I focused on the legal front with Marcus. As predicted, once Lisa got wind of the impending publication, she launched a legal challenge. A letter arrived from her lawyer, claiming that as the sole heir to the estate, she was the rightful owner of all my mother's intellectual property. "She's claiming the deed of gift is a forgery," Marcus told me over the phone, sounding more amused than concerned. "She is demanding you cease and desist all publication activities." "Can she stop it?" I asked, a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "Not a chance," Marcus reassured me. "We have the original notarized document. We have the notary's records. We even have journal entries from your mother mentioning her literary gift to you. Lisa is throwing a tantrum, and it's going to cost her a fortune in legal fees. We just need to follow the process." The legal battle was a slow, grinding affair that took place in the background, a minor annoyance compared to the excitement of the book's impending birth. Meanwhile, I saw the first signs of cracking in Lisa's perfect facade. A cousin called to tell me that Lisa had quit her part-time job at the local boutique. "She says she needs to focus on managing the estate," my cousin reported, her voice laced with skepticism. "She also bought a brand new luxury SUV." I pictured Lisa, cruising around town in her new car, living off the dwindling cash from our mother's savings account, completely oblivious to the enormous property tax bill that would soon be arriving for the $1 million house she now occupied alone. She was celebrating her victory in a race she didn't even realize she had already lost. The day The Crimson Compass was published, I went to a bookstore and stood, invisible in the aisles, watching people pick it up. I saw a young woman open it, read the first page, and a slow smile spread across her face as she tucked it under her arm and walked to the checkout counter. In that moment, I felt my mother's presence so strongly it was as if she were standing right beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Her voice, silenced by illness and deceit, was speaking again. It was speaking to the world. And the world, it turned out, was listening. The Crimson Compass did not just sell, it exploded. It debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list, a stunning achievement for a debut author, let alone one who was no longer with us. The story Evelyn had predicted came to life. News outlets, literary journals, and morning talk shows were all clamoring to tell the incredible tale of the secret novelist librarian and the daughter who had unearthed her treasure. I was thrust into a spotlight I had never sought. I did a select number of interviews, always steering the conversation away from the painful family drama and toward my mother's incredible talent. I spoke of her love for books, her quiet strength, and the beautiful, secret world she had created for herself. I was not a victim seeking pity. I was the proud executor of a genius's legacy. With each interview, with each glowing review, I was rewriting the final chapter of my mother's life, replacing the cruel lie in the will with the triumphant truth of her art. The book's success brought with it the first wave of royalty checks. The numbers were staggering, far exceeding anything I could have ever imagined. My small, quiet life as a nurse was transformed, but the money was secondary. The true wealth was in the letters that began to pour in from readers all over the world. They wrote about how my mother's story had moved them, how her characters had inspired them, how the Crimson Compass had reminded them of the enduring power of love and adventure. I was building a community around my mother's work, a testament to her spirit that was far more valuable than any piece of property. Meanwhile, Lisa's kingdom was beginning to crumble. The massive property tax bill for the house arrived, followed by the homeowner's insurance premium. The old house, I knew, was a constant money pit of repairs and upkeep. The savings she had inherited were finite, and her lavish spending had surely accelerated their depletion. Her legal challenge to the literary estate was summarily dismissed by a judge, who reportedly chastised her lawyers for wasting the court's time. She was left with a mountain of her own legal fees and no recourse. The beautiful house had become her prison, a constant, draining reminder of her hollow victory. Then came the call from Hollywood. Evelyn Reed phoned me, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "Are you sitting down, Chloe?" she asked. "Because the film studios have discovered Amelia Rose." It turned out that a major actress, a multiple Oscar winner, had read and fallen in love with The Crimson Compass and wanted to produce and star in a film adaptation. Her production company made an aggressive opening offer for the film rights. Within hours, 3 other major studios had entered the fray. A bidding war had erupted. Evelyn guided me through the dizzying negotiations. The offers climbed higher and higher, the numbers becoming surreal. The final offer, from the actress's original production company, was a life-altering sum, a figure that made the $1 million value of my mother's house seem like pocket change. I sat there, after the final deal was made, a contract for a major motion picture based on my mother's secret work sitting on my coffee table. The shy librarian from a small town was about to become a global phenomenon. I had not just reclaimed my inheritance, I had multiplied it tenfold, all by honoring the mother Lisa had tried to erase. The phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Lisa. It was the first time she had called me since the day of the will reading. With a steady hand, I answered. "I see your book is doing well." Lisa's voice was thin and sharp, stripped of the sweet, caring tone she had once used like a weapon. There was no preamble, no apology, just the raw, grating sound of envy. "My mother's book," I corrected her calmly. "It seems people are enjoying her work." "Right," she sneered. "Her work, I was the one there with her day in and day out. I was the one holding her hand while she was dying. I earned that inheritance, all of it." "You inherited the house, Lisa," I said, my voice even. "You got exactly what you wanted, the entire estate just as it was written in the will you had her sign." I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. She was backed into a corner, and like a cornered animal, she was lashing out. "The house it's a lot to handle," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "The taxes, the repairs, it's bleeding me dry. I can't afford it. I'm going to have to sell it." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and to my surprise, a small part of me meant it. It was a sad, pathetic end for our childhood home. "You have to help me," she blurted out, the demand raw and desperate. "That money you're getting, the movie money, that's Mother's money, it's family money. I'm entitled to a share. You owe me." I was silent for a long moment, listening to the echo of her audacity. She felt entitled. After everything she had done, the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty, she still believed she was the victim, that she was owed something. In that moment, I realized that the greatest punishment for Lisa was not poverty or the loss of the house. It was her own character. She would forever be trapped in a prison of her own resentment and greed. "No, Lisa," I said finally, my voice soft but unyielding. "I don't owe you anything. You had our mother change her will to reflect that I was a disappointment who deserved nothing. I'm simply honoring her final, documented wishes as you presented them. But she left me a different kind of will. She left me her heart, her stories. And that, it turns out, was the entire estate. I wish you the best of luck with the sale of the house." I ended the call before she could respond. I felt no anger, no triumph. Just a profound and weary sadness for the sister I had lost, and for the woman she had chosen to become. My victory was not in her defeat, but in my own liberation from the poison of her world. I had my mother back in the purest way possible. I had her words, her spirit, her legacy, and that was an inheritance no one could ever steal. The sale of the house on Chestnut Lane was a quiet, sad affair. Lisa, unable to keep up with the mounting debts, was forced to sell it at a loss to a developer who had no interest in its history or charm. I heard he planned to tear it down and build 2 modern, soulless McMansions in its place. I drove by one last time the day before the sale closed. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat across the street looking at the familiar porch, the towering oak tree we had climbed as children. I felt a pang of grief for the place that had once been the center of my universe, but the house itself was just a structure. The home, the love that had filled it, was something I now carried inside me. Lisa, after the sale, disappeared. I heard from a cousin that she had moved to a different state, her pockets temporarily filled with the proceeds from the sale, but her spirit, I imagined, as empty as ever. Our relationship was a casualty of her greed, a bond severed beyond repair. I had to accept that the sister I had grown up with was gone forever. With the incredible resources now at my disposal, I focused on building a true and lasting legacy for Amelia Rose. I worked with Evelyn and Marcus to establish the Amelia Rose Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting aspiring female writers, particularly older women who, like my mother, may have put their creative dreams on hold. Our first act was to establish a major literary prize for unpublished authors over the age of 50. The response was overwhelming. We were flooded with submissions from women all over the country, women with powerful stories who had been waiting for a lifetime to be heard. I sat on the judging panel, reading their manuscripts, and felt my mother's spirit in every page. This was what she would have wanted. Her secret passion was now a beacon, illuminating the hidden talents of others. I didn't stay in my small apartment, but I didn't buy a mansion either. I bought a modest, comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, with a large garden where I could plant roses, just like my mother S. The house had one essential feature, a beautiful, light-filled library. I filled the shelves with first editions of my mother's favorite authors, and in the place of honor, a leather-bound copy of The Crimson Compass. My life as a nurse felt like a distant chapter. My new work, as the executor of my mother's literary estate and the head of her foundation, was all-consuming and deeply fulfilling. It was a different kind of caregiving, a nurturing of art and spirit. I was no longer just tending to the sick, I was helping dreams to be born. The movie adaptation of The Crimson Compass went into production, a massive, star-studded affair. I was invited to the set, and it was a surreal experience to see the world my mother had imagined brought to life, to see famous actors speaking the words she had typed in secret in her small librarian's office. It was the ultimate validation of her hidden genius. One sunny afternoon, I visited my mother's grave. The simple headstone read Amelia Thompson, followed by her dates. Below it, I had added a new line, and her heart, Amelia Rose. I laid a bouquet of roses from my garden on the grass. "Well, Mom," I whispered to the quiet air, "you're a star." I told her everything. About the book, the movie, the foundation. I told her about the letters from readers, about the women we were helping. I told her how her words had saved me, how her secret gift had been a light in the darkest time of my life. I knew she couldn't hear me, but it didn't matter. The connection I felt to her was stronger than ever. It was a bond forged in the ink of her journals, in the passion of her stories. It was a love that transcended wills and property deeds. Lisa had tried to define our mother's legacy with a single, cruel lie, but I had been able to answer that lie with 1,000 beautiful truths. The inheritance I had received was not one of money, though the money was immense. It was an inheritance of purpose. My mother had given me a new life, a new direction, built upon the foundations of her own secret dreams. As I stood to leave, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The anger and the grief had finally settled, replaced by a quiet, profound gratitude. The family I had been born into was broken, but I had built a new kind of family, a community of readers, writers, and dreamers, all united by the magic of Amelia Rose. I had lost a sister and a house, but I had found my mother, and in doing so, I had found myself. The most valuable legacies are not the ones written in legal documents, but the ones written on the heart. And my mother's heart, I now realized, was a story without end. The Amelia Rose Foundation flourished, becoming a respected and significant force in the literary world. We launched workshops, mentorship programs, and scholarships. I took great joy in personally calling the winner of our annual literary prize each year, hearing the shock and elation in their voices as I told them their lives were about to change. Each call was a tribute to my mother, a ripple effect of the gift she had given me. The Crimson Compass movie W. As a critical and commercial success, Winning awards and introducing Amelia Rose to an even wider audience. The studio, eager to build a franchise, discovered that among my mother's unpublished works were 2 sequels. My mother, in her secret world, had created a trilogy. The shy librarian from a small town had, posthumously, become the author of a blockbuster series. My life settled into a rhythm of fulfilling work and quiet contentment. I traveled to promote the foundation, I oversaw the publication of my mother's other novels, and I tended to my rose garden. I never felt the need for the lavish lifestyle my new wealth could have afforded me. The greatest luxury was the purpose I had found. I was the keeper of my mother's flame, and my job was to make sure it burned as brightly as possible, for as long as possible. I never heard from Lisa again. She existed only as a ghost from a painful past, a reminder of how greed can poison the soul. I sometimes felt a flicker of pity for her, a woman who had been given a beautiful home but had no idea how to build a life. She had grasped for the material things, the tangible assets, and had completely missed the true treasure that was right in front of her. My inheritance was intangible. It was the quiet strength I discovered in myself. It was the profound connection to a mother I now knew more deeply than I ever had in her lifetime. It was the joy of seeing her art bring happiness to millions. It was the purpose I found in helping other women find their own voices. That was the estate. It wasn't a house or a bank account. It was a legacy of the heart, and it was mine. Years passed. The world continued to love the stories of Amelia Rose. Her books became classics of the genre, studied in literature classes. My role evolved from one of discovery to one of stewardship, carefully managing her legacy to ensure it would endure for generations to come. I grew older, and the fire of the betrayal cooled into a distant, philosophical scar. It was a part of my story, the catalyst that had propelled me into this unexpected, beautiful life. One day, a young woman, a recipient of one of our foundation's scholarships, came to visit me. She was a brilliant young writer from a difficult background, and her debut novel was about to be published. She sat in my library, her eyes wide with awe, looking at the collected works of Amelia Rose. "Your mother's story," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "It's not just in her books, it's in this foundation. It's in the chance you've given people like me." She proved that it's never too late to have a voice. "You made sure everyone could hear it." Her words were a gift. They affirmed that I had made the right choices, that I had honored my mother in the best way possible. I had not let the bitterness of my sister's actions define me. I had chosen, instead, to let the beauty of my mother's spirit guide me. The ultimate justice, I had learned, was not about punishment or revenge. It was about creation. It was about building something positive and enduring from the ashes of a painful past. Lisa had chosen a path of destruction, tearing down relationships and trust for material gain. I had chosen a path of creation, building a legacy of art, community, and hope. My inheritance was not something I had reclaimed. It was something I had helped to build. And it was a legacy that would continue to grow, a garden of stories tended with love, long after I was gone. My final project as the head of the foundation was to work with the local university to establish the Amelia Rose Center for Literary Arts. It would be a place for writers to gather, to learn, and to create. I funded it with a large endowment, ensuring its permanence. We even managed to acquire a trove of my mother's original letters and papers, creating a small museum dedicated to her life and work. It was the perfect, final tribute, a permanent home for her spirit. I thought about the 2 wills that had defined my life, the one born of lies and manipulation, a document of erasure, and the other, a simple, notarized gift, a document of love and understanding. One had tried to leave me with nothing, while the other had given me everything that truly mattered. It was a powerful lesson in the nature of true wealth. Lisa had fought for a house of wood and nails, and in the end, it brought her nothing but debt and isolation. I had been given a house of words and dreams, and it had allowed me to build a world. As I stood at the dedication ceremony for the new center, surrounded by writers, students, and lovers of my mother's work, I felt a sense of profound completion. The pain of the past had been transmuted into the joy of the present. The cruelty I had endured had become the catalyst for a legacy of kindness. My name is Chloe Thompson, and I am the proud daughter of a librarian who was secretly a queen of romance. I lost a sister, but I gained a universe, and in the quiet chambers of my own heart, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had been given the richer inheritance. The story of the two sisters and the two wills became a quiet legend in our family, a cautionary tale whispered from one generation to the next. It was a story about how the things we value ultimately define us. Lisa had valued a house, a tangible symbol of status, and her life had become as hollow as the empty rooms she was forced to sell. I had been gifted a legacy of the heart, and it had filled my life with a richness beyond measure. The truest inheritance is never what is left to you, but what is left in you. My mother had left me her quiet strength, her deep empathy, and her passionate, secret heart. And with those gifts, I had built a life that was a testament to her spirit. In the end, I did not need the house on Chestnut Lane. I had built a home for my mother's legacy in the hearts of millions of readers, a home that could never be foreclosed on, a home that would stand forever. And that was a legacy of which we could both be proud. My life's work became a testament to the idea that our true value lies not in what we possess, but in what we create and share. The Amelia Rose Foundation became my family, a sprawling, vibrant community of artists and dreamers. The pain of my sister's betrayal never fully vanished, but it transformed from a gaping wound into a faint scar, a reminder of a battle fought and won, not for money, but for the integrity of my mother's memory. I learned that forgiveness is a complex thing. I never forgave Lisa for what she did, but I did release the hold her actions had on me. Her story had a sad, lonely ending. Mine was still being written, filled with purpose and connection. The ultimate reclamation was not of money, but of narrative. Lisa had tried to write me out of our mother's story, to brand me a disappointment. I had responded by making my mother's true story immortal, and in doing so, I had defined myself not by another's lie, but by my own truth. And that truth was a story of resilience, love, and the enduring power of a well-told tale. The greatest irony was that in her effort to secure a material inheritance, Lisa had rendered herself a footnote in our mother's incredible story. She was the catalyst, the villain whose actions had inadvertently unearthed the treasure she never knew existed. She was a ghost in the story of Amelia Rose, while I had become its guardian. This was the final, quiet justice, not a dramatic confrontation or a public downfall, but a simple, irrefutable realignment of the narrative. She had tried to control the ending of our mother's life, but she had lost control of the story. And the story, in the end, is all that truly remains. The legacy of Amelia Rose was not one of wealth, but of empowerment. It was the story of a woman who found her voice in secret, and a daughter who made sure the whole world could hear it. It was a testament to the fact that the quietest people often have the most powerful stories to tell. And it was my life's greatest honor to be the keeper of my mother's story, her heart, and her truest, most valuable will. My inheritance was not a house, but a purpose. And that purpose built a home for my mother's spirit that would shelter and inspire others for generations to come. That is a legacy worth more than any earthly estate. As I entered my own later years, I found myself spending more time in my library, surrounded by my mother's words. I would often reread The Crimson Compass, not as the literary executor, but as a daughter, finding new layers of her wisdom and wit with each pass. The anger I once felt toward my sister had long since dissolved into a kind of distant pity. She had chosen a path of scarcity, believing that for her to win, I had to lose. I had learned that my mother's legacy was one of abundance, a wellspring of creativity and love that could be shared without ever being diminished. It was a legacy that grew richer the more it was given away. And in sharing it with the world, I had found a fulfillment that no amount of money or property could ever provide. The truest measure of an inheritance, I had come to understand, is not what you receive, but what you are able to give in its name. And in that, I was the wealthiest daughter in the world.